And we've got Perko Perkins on the line with us. You're zooming in though today, Perko, because you're not close by. Where are you?
I'm actually not too far away, Phil.
Okay.
I'm down in Sydney, and it is a little bit of a chilly day for this Queensland down in so I wish I was home. And it's great to see you, Robbo, in the studio too, mate.
Yes, it's good to see your face on a screen. But yeah, it's been a while since we've caught up. But always good to speak to you and to get some of your wisdom and your insight. So what are you wanting to share with us today?
Yeah, mate, big theme of my life is helping leaders reach their goals without losing their souls, as I like to refer to it. And one of the areas that I see oftentimes, not just for leaders, but for everyone, one of the areas that I see as a real challenge sometimes is in the area of relationships. And I'm talking relationships in every platform, like whether it's in your family, your marriage, or maybe it's in the workplace, but relationships can oftentimes cause havoc when we're trying to reach our goals without losing our souls. So yeah, I've just got some things that I'd love to share with people today that hopefully will be helpful in their relationships.
Oh, wonderful. Good. Well, I can't wait to hear all about it. I think that's something that we can all relate to, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah, whether it's your husband or your kids or other people around you. Tell us, what have you got for us?
So here's what I've found in my life anyway, Phil, Robbo. You can test this, by the way. So I'd love for you to fact check this.
Oh.
Every time I've had a conflict in a relationship, it's always come down to a gap between what I expected and what I experienced.
Okay.
And the thing that I expected didn't match what I experienced.
Wow.
And so I don't know, is that true for you? Like when you think of all the conflicts you've had in relationships, if you boil it all down, I was expecting this, but this is what I experienced. Would you agree with that? Is that kind of your...
Absolutely. And often it's because you had unrealistic expectations in the first place.
Absolutely. So here's what I find happens, though, and this is human nature because we're story beings. So we make sense of the world through story. That's how we do things in life. And so oftentimes when we have that gap between what we expected and what we experience, we begin to fill that gap with some sort of story. Actually, we sometimes will fill the gap with multiple stories. So I'll give you an example. You've got a person, a colleague that you work with, and you said, hey, we're going to meet at 9:00 and we're going to meet in this room at 9 and we're going to work on this project. And then they don't show up at 9:00 and you begin to tell yourself a story of like why they didn't show up at 9:00. 9:05 comes along, 9:10 comes along. Well, now you probably have had enough time to tell yourself multiple stories.
Yes, true.
Exactly.
It could be positive ones like, oh, I bet you they got stuck in traffic. So you give them the benefit of the doubt. Or maybe this has been a bit of a pattern for them and you start to go, well, you know what? They just are always late. But you just start to tell yourself stories. And honestly, even though that's what we do by default, it's possibly the worst thing that we could do for relationships. Wow. And Scripture has a lot to say about that, which I can't wait to share a bit more about.
Well, we look forward to hearing that. We are going to listen to a song and then we'll continue our conversation with Perko to, I guess, unpack this a bit more. Because you're right, mate. We do this just intrinsically. We don't even think about it. But I guess we want to make sure that we're, I guess, heading in the right direction with it and I guess directing ourselves even sometimes in this thing. So, stick around. We're going to continue our conversation with Jason Perko Perkins right after this.
Chatting with Perko Perkins. And Perko, I love this topic because I think something that I've often thought about is that it can be exhausting sometimes having imaginary conversations in your head or imagining scenarios that are never happening, but you can actually invest a lot of time and energy on these and it's not a helpful thing. So I'm glad you're going to unpack this for us a little bit further.
Yeah, so here's what I've found is we tell ourselves these stories. And my experience, I know this is not going to be everyone's experience, but my experience is that probably 9 times out of 10, the story that I've told myself or stories that I've told myself, they aren't always the truth. In fact, I would say almost every time there's maybe an element that might be truthful, but it's not the full story. And so one of the things that I've had to learn is this idea of stop mind reading or stop making assumptions of what the other person is thinking or of what happened, and really take the time to go and investigate before I just make an assumption or I make up a story. And so when I think about that, Proverbs actually is just a great book full of wisdom. And there's a particular chapter in Proverbs that speaks into this issue really specifically, Proverbs 18. It talks about, all throughout Proverbs, talks about two different people, the fool and the wise person. So you see this contrast of, hey, this is what fools do, and this was what wise people do. And we'll get into more detail. Like, I'm going to give you actual verses here a little bit. But essentially, Proverbs would say that the fool is somebody that just makes up the story. But the wise person is somebody that goes to seek out what actually took place. And so that's really the big contrast that we're talking about here. And they give some examples of it in Proverbs that I can't wait to share with you, because it's a practical way for you to then say, hey, I'm going to stop this storytelling habit of mine, this pattern of storytelling, and I'm going to be a wise person, not a fool that goes after the truth. So we'll talk more about that.
That's excellent. I love that. Well, I'd love you to just unpack a bit, because you mentioned that whole idea of mind reading, which I think if you're in conversation with someone, you can say, hey, can you help me out here? Can you, or even, I know there's a little phrase that your mate Pete Scazzero will say, will be like, can I read your mind? So like, you actually request that. But if you're in a situation like you suggested where, someone was supposed to meet you but they haven't turned up, you can't obviously, do that because they're not there.
Yeah.
But you can even understand where you go. Like, are you going negative or positive? So you can sort of be reading your own mind and trying to get a bit of a handle on, what's my, natural inclination.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's essentially, Robbo, the skill is to say, hey, can I check my assumption that I have with this person? When they do show up, I now have an opportunity, instead of just going with that story I've been telling myself, to check an assumption that I've made. Hey, can I have permission to check that assumption? But before they show up, Robbo, essentially you're asking yourself the same question. Hey, I need to take a moment here to check an assumption that I'm making without all the facts. And Proverbs is just full of wisdom around this whole subject. It's fantastic.
That's awesome.
Oh, give us some of that then, Perko. We'd love to know what that wisdom is.
So here's Proverbs 18:2. It says this: fools find no pleasure in understanding, but delight in airing their own opinions. So essentially, if we put it in this context, the fool is somebody that finds no pleasure in getting the truth of what's actually happened.
Right.
But the fool is someone who delights in making up their own stories or airing their own opinions in their own mind. So that's essentially what you're doing when you're doing that. On the opposite of that, you see that the heart of the discerning, it says in Proverbs 18:15, the heart of the discerning or the wise acquires knowledge, and the ears of the wise seek it out. So the contrast there between, hey, the fool is someone who just loves airing their own opinions, making up their own stories in their own mind, whereas the wise is somebody, or the discerning is somebody that loves to seek out the truth of what actually happened. So I guess that's really the principle, or that's the skill of saying, hey, do I want to be a wise person that seeks out what's the reality here? Or am I willing to just be foolish and make up my own stories in my own mind?
That's excellent.
Great reminder.
That's a great thing to be considering today, and I guess it's something that we can really, just reflect on in our own time, just to think, well, what am I doing here? Am I being wise or am I being foolish? So definitely an opportunity, even, I guess, to read through that proverb that you've just quoted there, Proverbs 18, and just to give it some thought. So, mate, really appreciate you've just scratched the surface for us today, but it's given us plenty of food for thought, which is fantastic. And we look forward to having you back on Rise and Shine in the next little while.
Hey, thanks for letting me be with you guys today. Love it.